When Jasmine Crockett, a renowned attorney, stepped into the luxurious car showroom wearing a simple cross around her neck, she expected a smile of welcome. Instead, she was met with the manager's cold disdain. But just one bold decision later, and the unexpected arrival of her brother, businessman Alex Crockett, turned the world of the man who looked down on her completely upside down. A battle erupted between prejudice and dignity, between arrogance and integrity. In the end, will justice and respect truly prevail? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Jasmine Crockett had just finished a grueling trial, her mind still buzzing with the intensity of the courtroom. Exhausted but victorious, she decided it was time to reward herself with something symbolic of her success, a car that represented her strength and hard work. Jasmine Crockett stepped into Capital Luxury Motors as if walking onto the floor of a courtroom, poised, focused, and fully aware of the unspoken judgments that came with every step. The temperature inside the pristine showroom seemed to shift subtly when she entered. Towering glass walls spilled sunlight over polished floors and million-dollar machines. To her left, a row of crimson Ferraris shimmered like heat on asphalt. To her right, matte black Bentleys glowed under chandelier light. But Jasmine's eyes locked onto the Porsche Macan, its low-slung, muscular frame poised like a panther. It wasn't just luxury, it was power wrapped in steel and leather, a reward, a statement, a mirror of everything she had become through years of grit, sweat, and late-night legal battles. Around her neck, a subtle cross hung, an emblem of her faith, strength, and resilience. It wasn't flashy, but it was a powerful reminder of everything she had overcome. The cross, like the car, was a symbol of her triumph. As she approached the Macan, her heels clicking with metronomic precision, Daniel, a young and clearly new salesman, hurried toward her with the earnestness of someone eager to prove himself. "Ma'am, welcome. That's our latest Macan. Top of the line," he said, almost breathless. 375 horsepower, 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds. Panoramic roof, and full custom interior. It just arrived from Stuttgart last week. Jasmine nodded, her eyes never leaving the vehicle. Her right hand grazed the hood, cool to the touch, sharp along the fender, powerful in its presence. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Daniel smiled wider, sensing her interest. "Would you like to step inside? I can show you." Then came the voice, cold, sharp, calculated. "That won't be necessary, Daniel." From the shadows near the executive office, Blake Thompson emerged, every bit the caricature of control. Slicked back hair, pocket square folded with surgical precision, and a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. His gaze found Jasmine instantly, and his approach was slow and deliberate, like a predator taking his time. "I'll handle this one." Daniel stepped back awkwardly, his smile evaporating. Blake stopped in front of Jasmine, standing just a few inches too close, making his dominance clear. His eyes drifted to her face, then paused, locked on the silver cross. There it was, the flicker of judgment, quick but unmistakable. The corners of his mouth twitched, and he let out a dry chuckle. "That's quite a bold choice," he said, his tone heavy with sarcasm. "Wearing a cross into a place like this? I suppose everyone needs their little charms." His eyes narrowed slightly. "But here, image matters. And yours? It's a little outdated." The comment landed like a slap, disguised as banter, but delivered with the precise aim of belittling. "You're Jasmine Crockett," he added flatly. "The attorney. I've seen you on TV, always making noise in those panels." He scanned her again, slower this time, gaze like a scalpel. "Didn't think someone like you would be interested in this car. Or this place." Then with a slight jerk of his chin, he added, "And that," his eyes cutting again to the cross, "doesn't really match the image we promote here." The insult was delivered with surgical precision, quiet enough to appear civil, but sharp enough to cut. Jasmine felt the sting, but she didn't blink. She had been underestimated before. She had been told she was too loud, too visible, too unapologetic. And every time she had answered with excellence. This time would be no different. She kept her posture straight, her voice calm and clear. "This cross isn't for you," she said evenly. "It's for me. It represents who I am, my strength, my beliefs, and the path I walked to get here. It does not disqualify me from being your customer." Blake tilted his head, amused. "You misunderstand," he said, voice syrupy. "Luxury has a certain aesthetic, a certain class. We cater to people with refined sensibilities." Jasmine's jaw tightened slightly, but her tone never lost control. "And yet you assume your definition of class is universal?" She folded her arms, eyes locked on his. "Let me make this simple. I'm not here for your approval. I'm here for that makan. I have the means. I have the intention, and I have the right to be treated like any other client in this building." But instead of acknowledging Jasmine's words, instead of stepping back and considering that he might have crossed a line, Blake doubled down, his arrogance calcifying into open contempt. He exhaled slowly, the kind of dismissive sigh reserved for people he didn't consider worth his time. His lips curled into a smile that was anything but kind. "Look," he said, voice low, deliberate, and soaked in condescension. "You seem like a smart woman, so let me explain this simply. This isn't just a showroom. This is a luxury experience. Everything in here, from the lighting to the espresso machine, is designed for a very specific clientele. People who know how to present themselves." He gestured vaguely toward her necklace, a sharp flick of his wrist like brushing lint off a silk suit. "And frankly, that little symbol of yours, it sends the wrong message." The words landed with surgical cruelty. Not loud, not dramatic, just calculated, cruel, and sharp enough to draw blood without leaving a mark. Jasmine stood still, her breath shallow but controlled, a quiet storm simmering just beneath the surface. She had spent her entire career dissecting power structures, dismantling prejudice in courtrooms, forcing institutions to confront their bias. But here she was, judged, reduced, and dismissed by a man whose greatest authority came from the overpriced suit he wore and the keys he handed over to people who looked the part. "Are you really suggesting," she said slowly, her voice steady but crackling with restrained fury, "that a necklace disqualifies me from participating in this experience you're selling?" Blake chuckled, as if her question was amusing. Quaint, even. "Not disqualifies," he said, shrugging. "Let's just say it complicates things. You see, luxury is about alignment, visual harmony. When a client walks in here, they expect to see people who reflect the world they want to buy into. You, that necklace, that courtroom energy, it clashes." His tone was rehearsed, like he'd given this speech before. Like this wasn't the first time he'd decided who did or didn't belong, based on something that had nothing to do with money, merit, or character. Jasmine blinked once, slowly. "You're policing my existence because you think faith is a fashion flaw," she said flatly, the sting in her words sharper now. "You're not curating a showroom, Blake. You're enforcing exclusion under the pretense of style." Around them, the gleaming floor reflected the makan's perfect symmetry, and the quiet murmur of nearby salespeople and customers seemed to fade into the background. Her voice dropped to a low, dangerous calm. "If a 1-inch silver cross threatens the illusion you've built here, then maybe the illusion was never that strong to begin with." Blake's face twitched, just slightly, a crack in the mask, but he recovered quickly, flashing the same smug, empty smile. "Let's not make this more dramatic than it needs to be," he said, taking a step back. "I'm just saying that we're selective. That's all. There's a certain image we like to uphold. You're free to take your business elsewhere if you feel uncomfortable with that." The smugness in his voice wasn't just infuriating, it was dangerous. It carried the weight of unchecked power, of a man who had never been held accountable, who had never had to answer to someone he thought beneath him. Jasmine's eyes didn't leave his. Her posture was unchanged, regal, composed, unyielding. "Oh, I will," she said, her voice smooth as glass but laced with iron. "But not before I make it absolutely clear that what you're doing is wrong. You're not defending luxury, you're gatekeeping dignity, and someday soon, you're going to find yourself explaining this moment to someone with far more power than you." Blake's patience had finally snapped. The confidence Jasmine carried, The calm defiance in her voice, it had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. His jaw tightened, the muscle twitching beneath his clenched teeth as his polished mask of professionalism began to crack. He had tried condescension, mockery, and exclusion, but none of it had worked. Jasmine hadn't flinched, hadn't backed down, and now backed into a corner by his own arrogance. Blake lashed out with the one thing he still thought he had: authority. His voice rose louder than it needed to be, loud enough for everyone in the showroom to hear. "All right, that's enough," he snapped, stepping forward. "I've been more than patient, but this conversation is over." His eyes, burning with resentment, locked onto the cross hanging around her neck. "This isn't just about a car anymore," he hissed. "This is about who fits in here, and you don't." The words weren't just cruel, they were calculated. His tone was filled with venom, his intent clear: to humiliate, to push her out, to reassert control by force if necessary. Then, with a dramatic wave of his hand toward the entrance, he barked, "You need to leave. Now." The entire showroom fell silent. The faint hum of the air conditioning, the soft jazz playing overhead, even the distant footsteps of other sales staff, all of it seemed to vanish under the weight of his voice. Customers looked up. Employees froze. Daniel, standing a few feet away, looked like he wanted to disappear. But Blake wasn't finished. He stepped closer, his finger pointing directly at Jasmine, and delivered the final blow with chilling clarity. "This place does not welcome people like you," he said, each word slow and deliberate, like bullets leaving a chamber. "If you don't leave, I'll have security escort you out." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire, thick, bitter, and impossible to ignore. Jasmine stood completely still, her posture straight, her face unreadable. She had just been publicly dismissed, not because of her behavior, not because of any policy, but because of prejudice, because of a silver cross, because Blake had decided she didn't belong. Her fingers instinctively brushed the pendant, not out of shame, but as a reminder. This symbol was not weakness. It was everything that had kept her steady through years of struggle. And it would keep her steady now. She scanned the room. Every eye was on her. Some looked away, others stared with curiosity, a few with quiet shame. But Jasmine didn't care. She wasn't here to please them. She was here to buy a car. And instead, she had been put on trial. And the verdict had already been delivered by a man who confused privilege for power. Blake's voice still echoed in the room, sharp and final. "This place does not welcome people like you." But even as his threat to call security hung in the air like a blade, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't need to be surprised because she had expected this. Blake's arrogance, his open disdain, the venom laced in his voice when he said she didn't belong. It didn't shock her. It angered her, yes. It insulted her deeply, but it didn't surprise her. She had seen this exact brand of polished prejudice before, dressed up in expensive suits and spoken in tones that pretended to be polite. So when he pointed to the door and told her to leave, she didn't flinch. She didn't give him what he wanted: a scene, a reaction, a loss of control. Instead, she did what she had always done when the system tried to shut her out. She kept her head high and walked through the fire like she owned it. The cold marble floor beneath her heels echoed through the stunned silence of the showroom. Each step a quiet act of resistance. Her posture remained perfect. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised. Not in arrogance, but in dignity. She didn't glance at the other customers who had paused mid-conversation to watch. She didn't look at Daniel, whose guilt was written all over his face. And she certainly didn't look back at Blake. He was no longer the obstacle. He was just the spark. As she neared the exit, sunlight spilled through the glass doors, casting a glow on her black blazer and catching the edges of her silver cross, which now gleamed like a blade. It was no longer just a symbol of faith, it was a warning. Outside, the world felt sharper, like the air had changed. Jasmine inhaled deeply, steadying herself, not because she was shaken, but because she was preparing. Her fingers slid into her purse, pulled out her phone with practiced calm, and opened her contact list. Not to call a friend, not to vent her frustration. She was already thinking 10 moves ahead. The people she knew, the influence she had, the spotlight she could shine on this. Blake had no idea the storm he had just invited. This wasn't about buying a car anymore. This was about principle, about making sure no one else walked into that showroom wearing something personal and left carrying someone else's shame. Just minutes after being kicked out of the dealership, Jasmine sat quietly in the front seat of her aging silver Honda. The engine was off, the air inside warm, and the weight of what had just happened pressed heavily against her chest. She stared out the windshield, her hands gripping the steering wheel as if it could steady her thoughts. But no amount of silence could drown out the voice in her head. Blake's voice, mocking her, dismissing her, as if she were unworthy of standing in his precious showroom. She blinked hard, then reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and scrolled until she found one name: Alex Crockett, her brother, her protector. The man who had built everything from nothing. With a sharp breath, she hit call. The line rang once, then twice. "Jazz?" His deep voice answered, warm but alert. He could tell something was wrong without needing to ask. "I need to tell you something," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. And then she did. In full detail, she told him about the Porsche Macan, the showroom, the salesman who started to help, and then Blake, the manager. The way he looked at her, the way he looked at her cross, how he told her she didn't belong, how he threatened to call security. Alex was silent for several seconds after she finished. Not because he didn't believe her, but because he was holding back his rage. "He said you don't belong?" he repeated slowly. "Because of your necklace?" Jasmine nodded even though he couldn't see her. "He said it didn't match the image of their dealership. And then he told me to leave. Just like that." The sound of Alex's chair sliding back cut through the phone. She could imagine him pacing now, shirt sleeves rolled up, jaw clenched. He had worked his whole life to earn respect, and now someone had tried to strip that respect from his sister. "That's not going to stand," Alex said, his voice sharp now. "He disrespected you, Jasmine. He disrespected this family, and I'm not letting that go." "Alex," Jasmine started, but he cut her off. "No, he thinks he can humiliate you and get away with it? Tomorrow morning, I'm going there myself." His voice was low and steady, the way it got when he was already building a plan. "And I'm not going in quietly." Jasmine let out a breath, a small, tired smile tugging at her lips. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious," Alex replied. "He kicked the wrong person out of that showroom, and tomorrow he's going to find out why that was the biggest mistake of his week." Jasmine didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. Her brother had just taken this fight personally, and when Alex Crockett took something personally, things changed. Breathtaking. The next morning arrived not with silence, but with thunder dressed in chrome and crimson. Just as the sun broke over Washington, D.C., the growl of a 6.75-liter V12 engine echoed down the polished boulevard leading to Capital Luxury Motors. It wasn't just any car that turned the heads of morning commuters. It was a blood-red Rolls-Royce Phantom, gliding like royalty toward its destination. The paint gleamed like lacquered fire, its chrome detailing sharp enough to slice the morning haze, and its bespoke grille bore down on the showroom like a silent declaration of war. This wasn't a visit. This was a statement. Alex Crockett sat behind the wheel like a general arriving at the gates of a fallen kingdom, composed, commanding, and cold with purpose. He wore a dark tailored suit, the cut sharp and intentional, the cuffs monogrammed with silver thread. No security detail, no entourage. He didn't need one. His presence alone turned the air electric. As he pulled up to the dealership entrance, the valet on duty froze, jaw slightly parted, unsure whether to bow or salute. Without a word, Alex stepped out, closing the Phantom's door with a smooth, controlled click. Every eye in the showroom shifted to him, like gravity had suddenly tilted in his direction. Inside, conversations halted mid-sentence. A barista at the espresso bar dropped a spoon into a ceramic cup. One of the sales reps blinked 3 times in a row, unsure if they were witnessing a billionaire or a storm in human form. But Alex didn't look around for reactions. He expected them. Every step he took across the showroom floor echoed like the ticking of a fuse. Shoes polished to a mirror finish, shoulders square. jaw set with the kind of stillness that came before decisive impact. He wasn't there to browse. He wasn't there to talk. He was there to confront injustice with the full weight of everything Blake Thompson thought he could deny Jasmine. Blake Thompson stood beside a deep blue Bentley Continental, engaged in animated conversation with a wealthy client in a designer overcoat. He was smiling, gesturing toward the hood ornament like he was selling a piece of heaven. But that smile faltered, barely at first, when he noticed a subtle shift in the room's energy. Conversations had stopped. Employees stood a little straighter. Eyes weren't on the cars anymore. They were all staring at the entrance. Blake followed their gaze, and then his stomach dropped. There, cutting through the center of the showroom like a blade through velvet, was Alex Crockett. The name didn't register immediately, but the man did. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, and walking with a slow, deliberate intensity that made the ground beneath him feel charged. Behind him, sunlight danced off the crimson phantom like a spotlight. And then it clicked. The name, the connection, the cross, Jasmine's brother. Blake's mouth went dry. His practiced confidence cracked like cheap porcelain. He tried to laugh, tried to mask the panic building in his chest, but it was too late. Alex had already spotted him. Their eyes locked across the floor, and in that moment, Blake knew. This was no ordinary customer. This was consequence in a tailored suit. Alex closed the distance between them, each step a silent verdict. When he stopped just feet away, his voice was low, but it rang with precision and power. "We need to talk," he said, "about what you did to my sister yesterday." Blake swallowed hard, every word he'd prepared dissolving before they reached his lips. The client beside him sensed the shift and stepped back instinctively, like a man backing away from a live wire. Alex didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The fire in his eyes said everything. "You made this personal. Now face it." The silence between them was a thin thread stretched to its limit, ready to snap. Blake's posture stiffened, his rehearsed confidence faltering under Alex's unwavering stare. The polished showroom that once felt like his kingdom now felt small, vulnerable, exposed. Alex didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was more dangerous than anger. It was the silence before the storm, the kind of silence that made people listen. "You judged my sister," Alex said, his voice cutting clean and deliberate. "Not because she was disrespectful, not because she broke your rules, but because you recognized her. You saw her face on the news, you knew her name, and you decided she didn't belong here. You saw a strong black woman wearing a cross around her neck and thought, that's not our kind of customer." He shook his head once, slow and deliberate. "You didn't see a client. You saw a threat." Blake opened his mouth, but Alex didn't let him speak. "Don't interrupt me," he said sharply, and Blake went silent again. "You humiliated her in front of strangers. You pointed at the door like she was trespassing on something you built. And all the while you had no idea who she is, what she's earned. Jasmine Crockett is one of the most respected attorneys in this city. She fights for people who don't have a voice. She doesn't just walk into courtrooms, she commands them. She spent her entire career defending the rights of others, and yesterday you tried to strip her of hers." The weight of his words settled hard in the space around them. Employees glanced at one another. A few customers shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to stay or go. But no one moved. Everyone was listening now. "And let's not pretend this was about your brand," Alex continued, his tone steady but ice cold. "You didn't deny her service because she didn't look the part. You denied her because of what that cross meant to you, because of what she believes. That necklace wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it wasn't offensive, but you used it as your excuse. You called her faith incompatible with luxury." His eyes darkened. "And that, Blake, is not just unprofessional, that is prejudice. Clear, ugly, and completely unacceptable." Blake's jaw moved, but no words came out. His face had gone pale. Sweat gathered just below his hairline, though the air conditioning hummed quietly above. Alex stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, but the intensity only deepened. "You didn't just insult my sister, you insulted every person who's ever walked into a place like this and been made to feel small because of how they dress, how they look, or what they believe. You disrespected her, and by extension, you disrespected this family. And let me tell you something, Blake. He leaned in just enough for the message to land with unmistakable force. We don't forget moments like that, and we don't walk away from them. He straightened, adjusting the cuff of his suit jacket. You think this place stands for excellence? Then act like it. Because what you showed yesterday wasn't class. It was cowardice hiding behind glass walls and leather seats. The room stayed silent. The tension didn't ease. It thickened, waiting for what would come next. But one thing was already clear to everyone watching. Alex Crockett wasn't here for revenge. He was here to make a man answer for what he thought would never have consequences. And now those consequences had shown up. In the flesh, in a red Rolls Royce, and with words that left no room for escape. The air in the showroom remained thick with silence, tension hanging like fog that refused to lift. Blake stood frozen, his posture rigid, his voice stolen, staring at a man who wasn't yelling, wasn't threatening, but was dismantling him piece by piece with nothing but truth and conviction. Alex let the moment linger, just long enough for the weight of everything he'd said to settle into every ear in the room. Then he took a step back, straightened the cuff of his blazer again, and turned his focus to the gleaming Porsche Macan on the display pedestal behind Blake. The very car Jasmine had come for, the car she had been denied. Without breaking his gaze, Alex said with clarity that sliced through the silence, I want you to process the sale for the Porsche Macan, right now. His tone was sharp, precise, offering no room for negotiation. And you will process it in Jasmine Crockett's name. Not mine, hers. He let the words sink in before adding, because you don't get to decide who's worthy of sitting behind the wheel of a luxury car. Not based on your biases, not based on your discomfort with someone's faith or reputation. That's not how this works. Not in this city, not on my watch. Blake's lips parted, but still no words came. His throat bobbed with the effort of trying to respond, but the authority in Alex's voice left him without footing. You had the chance to treat her like a customer, Alex continued, his voice now firmer, louder, and meant for everyone in the room. Instead, you treated her like an outsider. You didn't just make a mistake, you made a statement, one that needs correcting, publicly, permanently. The sales staff nearby didn't move. They didn't dare. Even the receptionist, who had been quietly typing just moments ago, had stopped mid-keystroke, her eyes wide, waiting. So here's what's going to happen, Alex said. You're going to finish what you refused to start. You're going to walk over to your terminal, pull up that Mackin's profile, and prepare the paperwork for immediate purchase. You're going to address it professionally, without attitude, without ego, and with the respect you failed to offer yesterday. He stepped even closer now, his voice quiet, almost intimate, but far more dangerous. And if you hesitate, if you try to spin this, delay this, or shift this onto someone else, I will buy the entire lot, tear your name off the front, and hand the keys to someone who understands what customer service actually means. The silence that followed wasn't just tense, it was seismic. Blake knew he had two options: resist and fall, or comply and fade. Either way, the lesson had been delivered, and every person in that showroom had heard it loud and clear. The silence that followed Alex's demand to process the make and purchase was deafening, but Blake's humiliation had only just begun. Alex took a slow step forward, his tone no longer cold. It was surgical, precise, and deadly calm. His voice dropped just low enough that only Blake, and those listening a little too hard, could hear it clearly. I told you, Blake, this isn't just about a car. This is about how you treated my sister, like she didn't deserve to exist in your space. And that kind of arrogance, that kind of ignorance, doesn't get washed away with paperwork. Blake's eyes twitched toward the showroom doors, as if looking for an escape. But Alex continued without flinching. There's a fundraiser gala this Saturday, he said. Veteran support, community outreach, the kind of people Jasmine actually fights for every single day. People you wouldn't dare speak to the way you spoke to her. She'll be there, front and center, along with senators, business leaders, veterans, and their families. You're going to be there too. He let the words settle in Blake's chest like bricks. But not as a guest. Blake tried to mask his confusion. What do you mean, he asked, though the answer was already obvious. You're going to show up as a volunteer, Alex said firmly. Not in a suit, not behind a name tag. On the floor, working, handing out water, clearing tables, whatever the team needs. You're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with the people you think don't belong, and you're going to learn something about humility, because the people in that room have earned every inch of dignity they carry. Blake swallowed hard. And if I say no? Alex smiled, but it wasn't kind. Then I'll turn this place into dust. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the certainty in his voice that made the threat feel more real than any raised fist. I will buy this building, brick by brick. I will put up a new name on the front, hire a team that actually knows what inclusion looks like, and make sure every person in this city knows exactly why Blake Thompson doesn't work here anymore. The room remained still. One of the sales associates behind the reception desk slowly lowered her coffee without taking a sip. A customer near the Porsche display shifted quietly, pretending to check his watch, but not fooling anyone. Blake stood frozen, the heat rising to his neck, his voice caught between pride and panic. Alex leaned in just slightly, voice quiet but razor sharp. You wanted to teach my sister a lesson about how this world works. Now you're the one in the classroom. And believe me, this won't be the kind of education you forget. He straightened his shoulders and stepped back, giving Blake one final look. You can either show up Saturday and prove that you still know how to serve, or stay home and watch your reputation bleed out faster than your client list. With that, he turned toward the exit, his words still hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. Blake had no doubt. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a sentence, and the clock had just started ticking. The tension Alex left behind didn't fade. It settled over the showroom like a storm cloud that refused to pass. Blake stood in the center of it, his spine stiff but his pride fractured, sweat gathering beneath his collar as the weight of every word pressed against his chest. The man who once strutted across this polished floor now looked like he might sink into it. He scanned the room quickly. Customers were still watching, employees were still listening, and the red phantom outside still gleamed like a warning flare he couldn't ignore. His jaw tightened, fists curling at his sides, but there was no way out. Alex had drawn the line with absolute clarity, and Blake knew he had already crossed it. Any refusal now wasn't just bad optics, it was career suicide. He cleared his throat, forced a shallow breath, and looked up, eyes hollow, voice clipped. Fine, he said, barely louder than a whisper. Then again, louder this time, trying to reclaim some shred of control. I'll do it. But the words tasted bitter coming out, like ash on his tongue. He wasn't agreeing out of remorse. He was cornered, stripped of the smug confidence that once shielded him. This wasn't an act of goodwill. It was survival. A few staff members exchanged glances. One of them, Daniel, exhaled quietly, the first sign of movement in what had felt like a frozen moment in time. Blake didn't look at them. He kept his gaze low, avoiding reflections of himself in the polished glass, avoiding the memory of Jasmine's quiet strength and Alex's unstoppable resolve. He'd been beaten, not with violence, but with something far worse for men like him: accountability, the kind you couldn't talk your way out of. And now, whether he liked it or not, he'd have to stand in a room full of people he once looked down on and serve. Alex's ultimatum hung over Capital Luxury Motors like a thundercloud, sparking whispers and speculation among staff and customers alike. Yet time refused to slow, forging ahead until the day of the highly anticipated Veterans Fundraiser Gala arrived. A month that felt like a year's worth of tension, build-up, and consequences. In that brief span, the name Blake Thompson had circulated in hushed tones across boardrooms and social media circles, always followed by the same question. Would he truly show up to the event Jasmine Crockett was hosting, and in what capacity? The promise had been made. The threat of losing everything if he didn't comply had been declared, and so the city watched, collectively holding its breath. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Convention Center was alive with energy on the night of the gala, an extravagant stage set for a cause that often went overlooked, supporting the country's veterans in their transition back to civilian life. Twinkling chandeliers lit the space from high above, each crystal facet reflecting and refracting the motion of hundreds of guests dressed in sharp tuxedos and elegant evening gowns. Large banners recognizing different branches of the military hung along the walls, fluttering gently whenever someone passed too close. At the center of the room stood a sprawling buffet arrangement, gleaming trays brimming with aromatic delicacies, while uniformed waiters carried silver platters of hors d'oeuvres through the crowd. Everywhere one looked, there were pockets of conversation. Corporate sponsors in hushed negotiations, veterans proudly sharing stories with fresh-faced volunteers, and politicians discreetly working the room for a favorable nod or handshake. A live jazz trio played soft, rhythmic melodies, weaving a harmonious underscore through the air that set nerves at ease, but never fully masked the underlying tension. The cause was noble, yet an undercurrent of anticipation rippled beneath the surface, as if a singular event was about to tilt the entire evening on its axis. And standing near the entrance with a composed grace that underscored her resolve was Jasmine Crockett, the mastermind behind it all, poised for the moment to come. Jasmine wore a sleek, floor-length black gown that showcased both elegance and authority, a subtle cross pendant glinting against the smooth fabric. For the past few weeks, she had fielded endless phone calls, managed sponsorship details, and ensured that every veteran's voice would be heard at this gala. Yet behind her polished smile lay the remnants of that fateful day at the luxury showroom. The sting of Blake Thompson's words, the dismissive way he had looked at her cross, the humiliation he'd tried to force upon her. She was no stranger to adversity. As a high-profile attorney, she had won cases where the odds were stacked sky-high against her. This event, though, felt personal in a way few legal battles did. Tonight wasn't just about raising funds. It was about showing that inclusion and respect could thrive in spaces once claimed by elitism. So, when whispers swept across the room, "He's here," he actually came. Her heart quickened, and she turned just in time to see a familiar face slip into the ballroom through the side entrance. Blake Thompson stood there in stark contrast to the lavish backdrop, clad in a plain white t-shirt, dark slacks, and a name tag pinned somewhat awkwardly to his chest. Gone was the expensive suit that once projected his inflated sense of authority. Gone was the superior air he'd worn like armor. Instead, he looked hesitant, uncertain. Clutching a stack of programs against his side, he stepped around clusters of guests, searching for the volunteer coordinator with eyes that betrayed a flicker of anxiety. A month ago, he might have strode into a space like this, chin high, confidence bursting at the seams. But now every movement felt measured, his posture cautious, as though he was bracing for an impact he couldn't predict. Yet there was no outward hostility. People gave him cordial nods, and a few recognized him from the dealership fiasco, but no one confronted him. The room that had awaited his presence had found him, and it was waiting to see what he would do next. By the buffet table stood Alex Crockett, sipping a glass of sparkling water with cool detachment, a quiet sentinel monitoring the arrivals. He wore a crisp midnight blue suit that suggested both confidence and exacting taste. Seeing Blake in such a subdued state was almost jarring. Here was the same man who had once dismissed Jasmine as if she had no right to occupy a high-end showroom, now wearing a volunteer badge that looked as though it weighed more than the world. Alex caught Jasmine's eye from across the room. A silent exchange passed between them. "He came. He's really doing this." And Jasmine's lips curved in the faintest smile. She might not forget Blake's past transgression easily, but she was prepared to allow him to prove his growth, if it was genuine. Alex, on the other hand, maintained a neutral expression, recalling the day he challenged Blake with the threat to turn that showroom to dust if the man refused to learn humility. Tonight, the lesson was in session. While the jazz band transitioned into a gentle rendition of a classic ballad, Blake found the volunteer coordinator, a petite woman named Eliana, who directed him to the far corner of the ballroom. There, near a small stage set up for veteran speakers, half a dozen volunteers busied themselves with tasks like organizing chairs, handing out name tags, and distributing informational brochures on mental health support. "You can help Thomas," Eliana said, gesturing to an older gentleman with a cane. meticulously setting up a small table for poster displays. Blake hesitated, but the memory of Alex's words fueled him. Refusal wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, he approached Thomas, quietly introducing himself. Thomas turned, blinking in mild surprise, then smiled. Soft, warm, accepting. Could always use another pair of hands, the veteran said simply. And just like that, Blake found himself crouching down to help adjust the table legs, his heart pounding with an unspoken admission. I'm here, I'm trying. Don't judge me the way I judge others. Across the ballroom, Jasmine kept half an eye on the exchange. She saw the moment Thomas reached out to pat Blake on the shoulder, saw the genuine gratitude in the veteran's face when Blake assisted with the table display. It felt like a slow unraveling of tension. The rigid stance Blake once used to broadcast superiority now bent in service to someone else's needs. She inhaled deeply, a mixture of relief and lingering skepticism swirling in her chest. Could a man so entrenched in elitism truly change in a month? A small voice reminded her that some transformations took a lifetime. Yet here he was, actively volunteering, shoulders slumped in humility instead of pride. She turned to Alex, who had edged closer, scanning the scene with that same calculated vigilance he used in high-stakes negotiations. He's learning, Jasmine murmured, half to herself. Alex gave a minute nod, eyes reflecting cautious approval. The evening rolled on, a symphony of conversations and heartfelt speeches from veterans who spoke of injuries both visible and hidden. Tales of resilience, brotherhood, and sacrifice resonated from the stage, echoing across the marble floors and high ceilings. Blake, stationed near the front with Thomas, found himself nodding to each story, eyes glazing with an emotion foreign to him. Empathy. A month ago, he might have yawned or glanced at his watch, mentally cataloging which high-end clients to court for the next big sale. But tonight, each word spoken by these men and women felt like a personal rebuke of the vanity he once worshipped. At one point, Thomas gently elbowed him, pointing to a line in the event brochure about specialized housing for disabled veterans. "Help me pass these around," Thomas said, handing him a stack of flyers. Blake took them without question, stepping into the rows of chairs with a purposeful stride. For a fleeting second, he recalled the day he'd called security on Jasmine. The memory bit like frost in his veins. Jasmine watched from the sidelines. Her own duties as host momentarily paused as she observed the subtle shifts in Blake's demeanor. He wasn't making grand gestures, wasn't trying to atone with public apologies. Instead, he was blending in with the volunteers, carrying chairs, offering refreshments, quietly listening to veterans who needed a patient ear. She thought about how just weeks prior, he'd sneered at her cross, dismissing her entirely based on a single piece of jewelry that symbolized her personal faith. Now that same man was humbly letting a retired Marine guide him through the intricacies of setting up a prosthetics display. The injustice still lingered in her memory. What he'd done had hurt, had burned her sense of belonging. Yet seeing him like this, she felt a hesitant sense of validation. People can learn, she reminded herself. They just need a reason strong enough to dismantle their walls. Nearby, Alex caught her eye again, and a flicker of mutual understanding passed between them. Then came the highlight of the night, a silent auction aimed at raising funds for rehabilitative services, culminating in a moment where each volunteer was asked to stand with a veteran on stage. Blake's name was called, and for a heartbeat, he looked like he might bolt. But the crowd's applause swept over him, leaving nowhere to hide. Slowly, he walked up the short flight of steps alongside Thomas, head held a fraction lower than usual, as though the weight of all the judgments he'd made was pressing on his shoulders. Jasmine and Alex stood in the front row, arms crossed, watching intently. The auctioneer began rattling off items, collectible memorabilia, vacation getaways, experiences with sports legends. Yet the real spectacle was the raw emotion in the room. When Thomas took the microphone and introduced himself, praising the volunteers who'd helped him, he paused to point at Blake. "And this young man right here helped me keep my balance all evening," he said, voice gentle but strong. "Didn't judge me for my cane or for my shaky hands, just made sure I felt safe." Blake's throat bobbed, his eyes dropping, and in that moment, the vulnerability was unmistakable. Applause followed, not raucous but heartfelt, and it wrapped around Blake like a blanket he didn't know how to accept. He stood there, blinking under the stage lights, suddenly aware that genuine respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. And for once, he hadn't tried to take it by force or by wealth. It had been given to him for doing something far simpler: caring. Jasmine, standing just a few feet away now, felt a complicated swirl of emotions. Relief that the man who tried to cast her out had finally learned humility. Sorrow for the countless times people like her had been turned away from spaces where they deserved to belong. Pride that the event she poured her heart into was not only helping veterans, but also teaching an unrepentant elitist that life couldn't be measured by brand names or price tags. Alex, still at her side, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, as if to say, "Yes, we did the right thing." She glanced at him, a small, thankful smile crossing her lips. "He's changing," that smile said. "He might never be perfect, but at least he's learning." When the program concluded, the crowd dispersed into clusters of conversation. Upbeat music resumed, and the tension eased into a soft afterglow of camaraderie. Blake stayed behind near the stage, helping Thomas descend the steps, ensuring the older man's cane found secure footing on each carpeted step. Jasmine and Alex moved closer, weaving around guests who paused to shake their hands or offer quick congratulations on a beautifully organized event. At last, they stood just a short distance from Blake. He noticed them, stiffened for a heartbeat, then nodded, an acknowledgement that the lines drawn between them had shifted in an irreversible way. Alex let a moment pass, scanning the man who had once threatened to upend his sister's dignity. Then he offered a curt nod back, not warm but not hostile either, a sign of begrudging respect. The hush of that shared acknowledgement felt more potent than any formal apology. Slowly, Thomas extended his hand to Jasmine, offering a thanks for the gala, while Blake stood nearby, shoulders lowered, uncertain if he should speak or remain silent. Jasmine broke the brief silence, her voice measured yet kind. "I see you've been busy tonight," she said, addressing Blake directly for the first time since the fiasco at the dealership. He swallowed, glancing from Jasmine to Alex, and then back again, as if expecting them to hurl accusations or demand restitution. But neither occurred. Instead, Alex spoke in a quiet, firm tone. "You kept your promise. That's a start." Blake's posture eased a fraction, though his eyes still flickered with the weight of unspoken regret. "I'm trying," he said, voice subdued. This is different from what I thought. I didn't realize." He trailed off, letting the unspoken words fill the space. He didn't realize that the people he'd dismissed so easily were capable of giving a level of empathy, camaraderie, and respect that his privileged world had never taught him. A soft, understanding smile crossed Jasmine's face, though it carried the echoes of everything she'd endured. "One night doesn't erase what happened," she said gently, "but it's a step toward understanding." Blake nodded, fingers twitching at his sides, as though he wanted to offer more, but couldn't find the words. Thomas, standing by, patted Blake's shoulder once again, a silent show of solidarity that struck deeper than any spoken reassurance. Alex, for his part, exhaled slowly, letting the tension that had been coiled in him for weeks loosen just a bit more. "You showed up," he added, "and you served. That's what matters tonight." Blake's gaze drifted to the name tag pinned to his shirt, just a flimsy piece of plastic, yet it symbolized the role he'd taken on. Helper, not gatekeeper. He closed his eyes for half a second, inhaling the reality that this moment was both a reckoning and an invitation to be better. The echoes of the gala lingered long after the final speech and the last toast, the quiet testimonies of veterans resonating in the hush of the midnight hour. When the lights dimmed and staff began stacking chairs, Blake remained behind, double-checking that every wheel on Thomas's wheelchair was locked properly, assisting with folding table linens, and making sure no pamphlets lay abandoned on the floors. It was a far cry from the man who once strutted through a high-end dealership, confident in his power to dismiss anyone he deemed unworthy. Now he seemed to have found humility in the simplest of tasks, picking up stray cups, guiding a war widow to the exit, or offering a parting handshake to a Marine with scarred arms and a steadfast gaze. And from across the room, Jasmine watched in silence, recalling the day he tried to strip her of her right to belong. This was the difference she realized between forced compliance and genuine growth. Maybe it wasn't a total metamorphosis. People rarely change everything overnight, but it was a pivot in the right direction. She glanced at Alex, whose gaze was locked on Blake. A single nod passed between them. Mission accomplished, or at least begun. Eventually, the ballroom emptied, leaving only staff and a handful of organizers busy taking down decorations. The last notes of the jazz band had faded into an echo, replaced by the gentle rustle of tablecloths and the low murmur of closing conversations. Jasmine stepped away from a final check-in with the event coordinator, heading toward the exit. She found Blake near the door, collecting used name badges and sorting them into a small box. He spotted her approaching, paused, and swallowed, a flicker of nerves crossing his face. She halted a short distance away, arms crossed lightly over her torso. "Thank you," she said, her tone devoid of sarcasm, resonating with genuine gratitude. "For being here, for helping. That means more than you realize." Blake lowered his gaze, nodding, a subdued, "You're welcome," escaping him. They left the rest unsaid, the apology he owed, the forgiveness she would consider, the path still ahead. Outside, the parking lot was awash in the artificial glow of security lights, the sky a muted canvas of city haze and distant stars. Alex waited by Jasmine's car, arms at his sides, posture relaxed yet still exuding the calm authority of a man who could buy entire blocks of real estate without breaking a sweat. Blake stepped through the glass doors into the cool night, pausing when he saw Alex. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Alex broke the silence with a short, measured, "You did the right thing tonight." There was no handshake, no grand show of camaraderie, just a statement of fact, delivered with the weight of finality. Blake nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. He started to walk away, then turned back, opening his mouth as if to speak. But Alex simply raised a hand, letting the moment stand without further complication. The unspoken truth remained. Some lessons carved themselves in deeper ways than words could capture. In the distance, a row of American flags flapped gently in the night air, reminding them all of the sacrifices honored that evening. Jasmine and Alex exchanged a final glance as Blake disappeared around the corner of the building, heading to his own car. "It took a lot for him to come here," Jasmine mused quietly. "But he had a choice," Alex countered, voice calm. "We just made sure he understood the cost of not learning." Jasmine tilted her head in agreement, recalling the raw determination in Alex's eyes when he first vowed to teach Blake a lesson. Tonight she had seen the fruits of that vow, an unexpectedly humble version of the man who had once caused her so much pain. Did it erase the past? No, but it was a beginning, a rare moment of hope in a world too often ruled by prejudice and profit. "He's not the only one who learned something," Jasmine murmured, exhaling slowly. "Maybe we all did." The siblings headed to their respective cars, minds alight with the night's events, the transformations they'd witnessed, and the echo of applauding veterans who deserved far more than just one fundraiser in their honor. The city lights shimmered across the asphalt, reflecting a world that could be both cruel and beautiful in the same breath. A gust of wind carried the distant hum of traffic and the faint, lingering notes of the jazz band that had packed up hours ago. In that swirling blend of sound and shadow, Jasmine thought of how quickly life could shift. 1 month, she repeated to herself. That was all it took to turn an arrogant dealership manager into a hesitant but earnest volunteer. Maybe that's enough time to spark real change. Glancing over, she saw Alex climb into his own car, the engine humming to life with quiet power. Their eyes met one last time. No words were needed. Both knew they had set something greater in motion. And as Jasmine turned the key in her ignition, she couldn't help the small, resolute smile that tugged at her lips, convinced that no matter how many showrooms or suits tried to limit who belonged, dignity and unity would always find a way. The story of Jasmine and Alex began in a moment loaded with prejudice, a single instant where someone else decided who did and did not belong. Jasmine, an accomplished attorney, fresh from a grueling trial, entered a luxurious setting, expecting to be treated like any other capable, paying customer. Yet because of a simple cross around her neck, she was dismissed and humiliated, as though her personal symbol of faith rendered her unfit for that upscale environment. Instead of allowing anger to consume her or engaging in fruitless shouting, Jasmine chose a path of measured resolve. She walked out, her pride stung but still intact, already formulating a plan to reveal the injustice hidden behind polished floors and high-priced cars. Her brother Alex, a self-made real estate mogul who had built his fortune through grit and an unbreakable spirit, decided to stand beside her. He took action with the kind of calculated calm that signals more than mere indignation. It signaled unwavering conviction. In that moment, these siblings challenged an unspoken rule that wealth and elitism could determine one's worth. By quietly, yet firmly, standing their ground, they exposed the cracks in a world that believed it had the right to judge personal beliefs. Together, Jasmine and Alex orchestrated a confrontation that was less about revenge and more about forcing accountability. Alex arrived in a stunning, high-value automobile to the very dealership that had turned Jasmine away, commanding attention without uttering a single word. He didn't need to shout or threaten. His presence alone spoke volumes about the hypocrisy of gatekeeping wealth and prestige. In that face-off, the siblings showed that money itself was not the issue, but rather the mindset that presumed it could dictate who belonged in a space meant for high-end clientele. By leveraging both their financial means and moral clarity, they made the manager, Blake, confront what he had done to Jasmine. He had mocked her symbol of faith, reduced her to an inconvenient presence, and tried to erase her dignity in the very moment she sought to reward herself for her hard work. Yet instead of showing unbridled fury or seeking to destroy him, they chose to educate him through an invitation to serve, to meet the people he looked down on, and to see firsthand the worth of individuals beyond their outward appearance or personal beliefs. It was a showdown that blended personal stake with universal principles. The lesson here cuts deep. When discrimination arises, genuine action can overturn even the most stubborn perceptions. Jasmine had every right to be enraged, to file a lawsuit, or to publicly shame the dealership for its blatant bias. But she recognized that systematic change demands more than a solitary moment of outrage. It requires the humiliator to experience the very humanity they once dismissed. By insisting that Blake volunteer at a veterans fundraiser, an event close to Jasmine's heart, she effectively placed him in the path of real stories, real struggles, and real valor. Those veterans whom Blake might have otherwise overlooked became his teachers, showing him that true class emanates from character, not from brand labels or social circles. Through handing out food, assisting wheelchair-bound soldiers, and listening to their experiences, Blake confronted the undeniable truth. One's value isn't tied to gold-plated surfaces or brand associations, but to empathy, resilience, and mutual respect. It was this immersion, this forced proximity to lived realities, that chipped away at his preconceived ideas. Throughout this journey, Alex and Jasmine functioned like two halves of the same conscience, one armed with legal prowess and unshakable composure, the other wielding financial weight and moral fury. Their combined efforts underscored an essential message. It takes more than raw power to change minds. It takes purposeful, targeted compassion. By confronting Blake without hate, they demonstrated that even when you have the upper hand, using it to instruct rather than annihilate can lead to meaningful transformation. The sting Blake felt was not from a barrage of insults or lawsuits. It came from being required to see people he had scorned as fully human, deserving of dignity. Jasmine's unwavering stance during the dealership debacle and Alex's resolute handling of the aftermath together formed a united front that refused to let prejudice slide. In essence, they taught him, and anyone else who witnessed, that fairness isn't a favor reserved for a select few. It's a foundational right that no one should be denied. Their victory was not merely a personal triumph, it was a blueprint for responding to bigotry with strategy and grace. Ultimately, the crescendo of their story reveals a universal truth. No one can judge you simply because of your personal beliefs, and you should never relinquish your right to be treated fairly. Jasmine, who had been subjected to prejudice over her cross, refused to let that moment define her or discourage her from seeking what she deserved. Alex, who could have dismantled the dealership entirely, instead used his influence to illuminate an alternative path for Blake, one that led to reflection rather than obliteration. By ensuring he faced veterans who exuded quiet dignity, they shattered his biases in a more profound way than any legal battle or public scandal could have achieved. In so doing, they showed that sustained, purposeful action is the key to rewriting a narrative of discrimination into one of enlightenment. Yes, there was tension, there was anger, and there was undeniable power at play. But above all, there was a refusal to let hatred be the final word. The siblings used respect, compassion, and an unwavering belief in justice to reshape Blake's perspective, preserving their own dignity every step of the way. Their story lingers as a testament to the power of standing tall in the face of prejudice, proving that a single act of determined humanity can echo far beyond one heated confrontation. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.